Okay, it's a good time to tell about the charges that I got here in Tillamook, Oregon. Russell verified the A&E thing. That was on the 27th or 29th of September of 2023 that came out. And they had some advertising before it came up. Natalie Bollinger had already been dead for years. And that was their pilot episode, Season 1, Episode 1. So, of all the murders in America that they could have picked to start as their grand premiere of this new television show, they chose Natalie Bollinger. And they chose to knowingly and intentionally slander my name, as well as intentionally leave out important information. You might have noticed that they had some video footage of me talking to the detectives in Natalie Bollinger's case. That's one of the pieces of video evidence I've been trying to get. That conversation between them and I. Well, you guys paint me as some horrible, delusional human being who's going out of his way to destroy lives and so on and so forth. No, I'm telling the truth about abuse. I'm telling the truth about how impossible it is to get somebody to listen when you have a dick. If you're not good looking, if you don't have money. Anybody can be a predator to you, knowing that they can get away with it and call you mentally ill. If you have PTSD because you were just assaulted, like me, what do I have PTSD from? We got my paperwork. I've been diagnosed with PTSD over and over and over again. Those very same people state outright that I am not schizophrenic, that I do not fit the criteria for schizophrenia, that they saw no signs of delusions, no signs of hallucinations. Here in Tillamook, they're trying to cover up the Natalie Bollinger situation just as much as anywhere else. They're trying to cover up how many people at TFCC knew and how many people at CARE. Sorry, there's a TFCC building that way. There's one that way. They spend a lot of money having multiple buildings open, and they've recently had to close one or two of them and consolidate. But everywhere, this is a racket. There's services that are made to not help us. Your money, your tax dollars are being spent to victimize victims on the streets. They spent over $100,000 just on the jail part of it. Not to mention the $22,000 just for one of my public pretenders. I know that because he was looking at his lawyer counter and it was saying $15,000 and then a little dollar sign, and it was reaching up while we were in court. Of course, he was charging the state for that time that he was spending, but he wasn't prepared for court. And as far as the mentally ill stuff goes, he told me that we wouldn't even have to deal with that. That the DA wasn't allowed to bring that up because my evaluations show outright that I am not schizophrenic or delusional. So he's not allowed to pretend that I'm schizophrenic or delusional. Now, he did recognize in court by stating that I had made as many calls that I did. Well, they claim that I never tried to call the police when these things happen. They claim that I never tried to get help when these things happen. I called 911. But there's also the safety issue with the police. And I tried to address that as well. Like, if you're going to send me a police officer who's refused to do his job and bullied me previously, or threatened me, or one that I have to try to turn in because he's done those things, They're just going to bully me further. They're going to play stupid, run me around in circles, and talk over everything that I say. Try to make it out to be my fault. It's victim blaming and victim shaming 101. These supposed mandatory reporters all have to call somebody else to find out what they're supposed to do. We're going to talk about Mary Palominos. This is what's called a hinge pin or a linchpin. This is basically somebody who's an antagonist. The sheriff's department here, I got footage of one of the deputies beating on a 13-year-old girl, slamming her off of a truck. Didn't say anything, he just ran up, grabbed her, and slammed her. But there's a lot of other situations with them and with the police. Like when the police, I'm told that I need to turn in the abuse to these other different agencies. Well, when I tried to turn in Lynn Lothman, I was arrested for improper use of 911, and they dragged it out, and they gave me public pretenders who didn't care about what this was all about. They didn't care about evidence, and of course they had investigators that they, for example, with Benjamin Fishberg, he wanted me to send my evidence to his investigator instead of to him. His investigator said that he wasn't going to do any work because he hadn't been paid. I let Benjamin Fishberg know that. It didn't make any difference to his investigator. His investigator hadn't been paid. Benjamin Fishberg couldn't get that through his head. Meanwhile, court was coming up. I recorded abuse, people assaulting me, people threatening my life, people who had done it previously, people who had worked together with others previously to harm me, to threaten me, to assault me, to vandalize my vehicle. There's a lot of evidence, and I've had to post it on YouTube because there is no possible way to get all this evidence to the people that it needs to get to. And then there's the fact that I can't function to do the things that they expect me to do. I don't know how to do these things, and I have no assistants doing these things. Nobody is teaching me how to do the things that they're telling me to do. Meanwhile, everybody's got different instructions on what I'm supposed to do, and if I don't do what they want, then they get angry with me, and they pretend that I'm not trying. Melissa this morning was going to try pulling the, I'm sorry for going off on that tangent. We do need to get onto the Palominos situation. Anyway, the 3 deputies that I was primarily trying to turn in for refusing to investigate and obstructing justice and being very inappropriate, all 3 of them were the ones to arrest me, and there was a sheriff's department guy there every time, at least, and I think on one of those occasions, a state patrolman. Improper use of 911. Same thing they charged me for in Nebraska for trying to turn in Scott DaCosta, who showed up. Scott DaCosta showed up. Kind of like when I told Sean about the situation with Shelly and Melissa, he had Melissa call me. Kind of like when Officer Schneider helped the people who stole my computer and all the evidence that was with it. And I had to try to turn him in. And instead of sending me to somebody I could turn him into, they sent me to him instead. There are so many recordings of these things. Thousands of them. Thousands of recordings of me getting run around in circles and nobody bothering to investigate. If they were investigating, they would look at the fucking evidence, and they're not. They're making any excuse not to. And then they use the outcome of me being victimized as an excuse for not doing their jobs. So last year, a guy named Masim Vijan, who had threatened to kill me multiple times. You've heard the videos and stuff like that. There's a lot more. There's a lot of recordings of him wanting me to threaten his Venezuelan workers in Spanish. Well, I don't know Spanish, so I had to use Google Translate, and I was not going to threaten them. It was really bad. It literally was human trafficking. So he came at me with a bat, and at that time I was also having to deal with Andrew Wolnez's son and his son's friends throwing stuff out the window at my vehicle. There's not enough tobacco on that to smoke. I'll burn my fingers. And yeah, I was having mental breakdowns over this. They kept on pretending that these were delusions. Despite the evidence, they kept giving me links that were broken, and I'd asked them to show me how to use it, and they wouldn't. Or they'd claim they didn't know how to use it. You can see in those videos, I never approach my predators. It's always them approaching me. But that's not how Lynn Lothman wanted to play it, because he was one of the officers that showed up when I had to try to turn in the abuse. Even knowing that I was trying to turn him in for doing this stuff previously, they still sent him. No, he's not going to investigate. Are you kidding me? And the same thing with David Martinez. David Martinez got threatening. These guys all try to threaten me for trying to turn in the abuse and for trying to turn them in. Lynn Lothman showed up repeatedly when I had to try to turn in Lynn Lothman to his superiors. He got to show up and bully me first. That's not okay. If I'm calling to try to turn in Lynn Lothman, if he shows up, he needs to leave immediately. That's not okay. At the hospital, that's not what they did. More than once. So the situation with Natalie Bollinger, not only were they aware that it was true, they also kept on bullying me about it. Treating me inhumanely because of it. Like Carla at the hospital here. Had already assumed it was all true, and she was doing everything that she could to try to make sure that I was not treated humanely at the hospital. Now, there's laws about when you put somebody on a hold like that. I was getting along with people, and there was no issue, but Carla wanted to create an issue. And she worked together with TFCC workers to do that. And thank goodness there was a doctor there and a woman named Carissa with level heads. Carissa is an important part of this story. Also, when I told you earlier that one of the deputies here assaulted a little girl, he also threatened multiple people, myself included. He threatened me in front of Deputy Jungling in the jail. And then he came in to harass me later on over Mary Palominos. There was a man named Zachary Dose who was threatening her life. And he came in to try to intimidate me and pretend that I was texting and messaging with Zachary Dose outside or here to have her harmed. And that is absolutely not right. I don't want anyone harmed. But it occurs to me that a lot of these abusers don't know what this actually feels like. that doesn't mean that I'm willing to go out there and actually physically assault them back. So I was in jail without an attorney for 14 days while they tried to pull the mentally ill thing. See, they let these people hurt me, and the cops talk in circles and send me to all these agencies until I have a mental breakdown from an overload of this quantity of abuse and having to turn it in immediately and it not being taken seriously immediately. Being treated by the DA's office like these calls were made for no reason. And you get to see in my videos very clearly that these calls were not made for no reason. So I had to try to turn in a judge as well. 2 of them, actually. I've got the paperwork that shows that I tried, but also I didn't have access to any of the evidence at the time. And then there's the sheer quantity of abuse. So the first 14 days that I was in jail, they had to drop the charges and let me go. If I'd have had a real attorney and we'd have taken it to court, then they'd have gotten in a lot of trouble. But that's not what happened. After 14 days of abuse, they had me, they told the judge that I was, mind you, it's Judge Trevino, who I was already trying to turn in. So the situation there was that the people at CARE and people at TFCC and the Sheriff's Department all lied about these situations, pretended that I was delusional and schizophrenic, and that I was self-harming, so I was a danger to myself and others. And absolutely that's not the case. The conditions that I was living in, that was torture. That is the right word for it. Deprivation of human contact, separated from my evidence, prevented from turning in the people I was trying to turn in. And who was I trying to turn in? Benjamin Fishberg. And Benjamin Fishberg abused his position of power to have me put on a mental health hold to begin with on that shit. To claim I was mentally ill. I didn't have another attorney to put on it because all of them are used to just railroading homeless people and making a profit. Public defenders make a lot of money off of not defending homeless people because nobody cares if they defend the homeless people. They just go in there and pretend a little bit and make some money. In this particular case, Benjamin Fishberg abused his position of power to take advantage of the situation and have me harmed. He was very well aware that I was being abused. He had seen evidence of it, and he had been given more evidence of it. But he didn't want to do that. Here in the state of Oregon, attorneys are mandatory reporters, even public pretenders. And they didn't want to do their jobs. They didn't want to recognize that all of these situations are happening over abuse, over assaults that I'm trying to turn in. And I'm having to turn them in to people who, well, treat me with nothing but disrespect and contempt. When I had to try to turn in abuse by the police and sheriff's department, and I had to go to the court's window on the upper floor, the people at the courts treated me with disrespect, as well as the sheriff's deputy who was there. And when I had to try to turn them into themselves, which is my instructions, this is obviously insane, isn't it? I'm having to turn them into themselves in all these cases. In all these cases, we say, we didn't do anything wrong, you're delusional. Nobody's trying to hurt you. People aren't assaulting you. Nobody's threatening your life. So that 14 days after they let me out, they didn't let me out. And I was afraid for my evidence and for my vehicle. My evidence, a lot of it was in my vehicle. And I was afraid for my evidence in storage. If I'm not able to pay those bills, then that all gets destroyed. Evidence of abuse by law enforcement. Evidence of abuse by mandatory reporters. Evidence of, well, just like the situation I've been showing you the last few days. The people at TFCC, absolutely, their own words prove that they were aware of the abuse, that it was not a delusion right from the start. The people at CARE were very, very well aware that the Natalie Bollinger situation was not a delusion. Hell, they had a picture hanging up in their office for well over a year. Me having to go to these people so that they can turn in their friends and coworkers. Mandatory reporters do have to do that. That is part of their job. But if they refuse to do that and pawn you off onto somebody else, they're putting the victim at further risk. Are they taking the assault seriously? Are they taking the threats against my life seriously? Or are they pretending it's threats against them? This is all stuff that evidence that I showed them of actual abuse against me and threats against my friends and family they used to pretend that I was threatening them. No investigator showed up. They intentionally lied, and I wasn't allowed to defend myself. I didn't have an attorney, and they were calling me mentally ill. Over and over again, this is their tactic. You guys have gotten to see the evidence that these assaults are not delusions, that Natalie Bollinger is not a delusion, that these people threatening to kill me and my friends and family, these are not delusions, that the people who are assaulting me are committing hate crimes. I mean, they're calling me all sorts of names, calling me a homosexual, calling me a child molester, a pervert, a murderer. And they think that makes it okay to assault me. You got to hear Andrew Wolnez screaming about how I was wanted for murder in Colorado. Look it up. That's what he said. That was the day I met him. That was right after the first and second assault. That was the third one. You can see in all of those, I never approach him. I never swing at him. Nothing. So, when I was let out of jail, I was assaulted the day I got out of jail. I do have evidence that I went to the hospital. The lady at the front desk of the hospital got a shitty attitude with me. Told me I should have called the police. What happens if I call the police? They bully me and arrest me for improper use of 911. They pretend it was just one assault back in 2022 and that I should just let it go, but it hasn't been. And for every assault that I have recorded, there's at least one or two of them that aren't. Most of the people that assault me, I don't know who they are. They only assault me once. I don't know their name. I don't know shit about them. I don't know where they live. Nothing. I know that they're screaming about Natalie Bollinger when they hit me. That's what I know. People say, why don't you change your name? These people don't ask me their name when they're fucking hitting me. They know exactly who I am and exactly what the fuck they're doing. And they're not going to wait for me to pull out my phone and record them. They're already swinging and fucking screaming. So I had to try to turn the abuse in that I was enduring through that and the fact that my vehicle was towed and later destroyed. Thank you, Martinez, again. And they didn't bother to look at the fact that I was calling 911 over recorded assaults, recorded abuse. Police officers in this town literally saw the windows broken out of my vehicle and still did nothing. Still bullied me and said that was Sadler. He can't help but put on this stupid little smirk when he's being a jerk. But his body camera doesn't record his face, it just records whatever's in front of him. So, after a few days, Massam Bujan, who had been one of the people I was trying to turn in, well, There's a situation with him and that pole that he'd already swung at me previously that I tried to turn in. I did call 911 about the situation, and I was the one arrested. Now, I'm supposed to not go into all the details because this is potentially worth millions of dollars or some shit, but I have to, again, talk to an attorney. I don't think it's worth millions of dollars. I mean, we got all these advertisements up, and I see that people are paid a lot more for a lot less. But the situation is that these are also criminal actions. So a lot of the details, when they do a criminal investigation against Sadler and they bring this situation into play, they will be able to show that all of these agencies I was being sent to, well, they pretended that I was delusional, knowing that I was not, and continued to do that, and continued to work together and push that narrative through all of this. All of them knew full well that what I was saying was not a delusion, not even close. The assaults were not delusions. Natalie Bollinger was not a delusion. That goes for CARE, that goes for TFCC, that goes for the police and the sheriff's department. I had multiple homeless people come up to me and tell me that police officers, and specifically in Lothman, was running around telling homeless people that I was wanted for murder in Colorado. Deputy Taylor told me, yeah, I got to hear those rumors myself. I got to hear people that I know telling me that there's some guy in town who's wanted for murdering some little girl in Colorado. And he told them that if that was the case, that person would already be on a bus to Colorado. Me and him spoke quite a bit in the jail. And one of the things is they don't write it down. When you tell them about the abuse, these mandatory reporters, they don't write it down. And because they didn't write it down, they get to pretend that you never tried to tell them. So I was arrested a second time. I've only been out of jail like 2 weeks. I've only been out of the hospital for less than a week. Thank goodness, Miss Carissa. And also thank goodness for that doctor. But I still had to work with John Holland, who is continuing to play this crap and continuing to lie to the courts for TFCC, as well as many other TFCC workers who had taken part in this over the years. So when I was in the jail and I was still trying to turn in the multiple situations that happened the previous time that I was in jail, there was a deputy in there named, hold on, let me make sure I get his name right. God, I can't remember. Well, I'll remember it. Anyway, he was bullying me, and he threw a spork at me, and he was just being a big jerk about a situation that he didn't need to be. There was no reason for him to be antagonistic, but they were all antagonistic, all of them. I wasn't the only person that they bullied, and the people they bullied most were the ones who were quote-unquote mentally ill. Anyway, Mary Palominos was a witness to the spork incident. She wasn't working that day, but she did look it up on camera. And so I tried to turn it in. And I was bullied even more. Also, Mary Palominos had been nice. This was like her first few days at work, and she had been nice to me. And after I tried to turn that in, when she came back to work, she was extremely mean. Now, she also told me later that she looked up the Natalie Bollinger thing and watched some of those shows. But those shows don't tell the truth. The evidence shows that these places did not tell the truth. It shows that the police intentionally did not tell the truth. TFCC did not tell the truth. Waylon Lolatai did not tell the truth. Neither did Officer Vanderleest. None of these people told the truth. Instead, they slandered my name to the public, slandered my name to the courts, and slandered my name to mental health people after taking away my evidence and my ability to show the evidence. They abused their positions of power to keep me locked up for a really long time. And because Mary Palominos had gotten in trouble over that situation with that other deputy, she was the linchpin for the majority of it. She was incredibly mean over and over and over again, and the deputies would do nothing about it. They knew it was happening, but they thought it was hilarious. These were the deputies who had committed these atrocities towards me for the 14 days that I had no attorney, nothing. And the only people that I was able to deal with were people who were pretending that, well, people that I tried to turn in, every one of them. Their mental health specialists were TFCC staff who knew that Natalie wasn't a myth and continued to pretend that it was a delusion and a figment of my imagination. They wouldn't write down my story, they just wrote down delusion. They wouldn't write down what I was saying that was this quote-unquote delusion. They just wrote down delusion. Over and over and over again, police officers that I tried to turn in have pulled this trick. And then later on, when people say, oh, well, we're going to look at your history before we hear your story. Interesting. For 9 months, Mary Palominos would grind on me and grind on me. I don't mean physically, I mean emotionally. She would go out of her way to be just incredibly mean. Now, when Zachary Dose was threatening to kill her, I definitely tried to turn it in. That's not okay. But he kept on threatening to kill me along with a lot of other inmates. Many of them stated Natalie Bollinger as their excuse. Some of them made up other excuses. But through all of it, if Mary Palominos was working, she was incredibly mean. When I had to try to turn something in, they wouldn't let me turn it in. It took them at least 3 months for them to start treating me like a human being in there, and it's because they got to know me. The people I saw on a daily basis, well, they know I'm not schizophrenic or delusional, but their superiors kept on trying to play this. And through all of it, Mary Palominos is just being incredibly horrible to me. Over and over and over again. Just one of the most horrible human beings that you could have in that position. And she kept it up for 9 months. After 9 months, Donald James Jungling finally had a talk with her and told her to stop. And after that, she was nice to me, and I talked to her on the call button. But for that 9 months, she made my life hell, and the other deputies made my life hell. They knew what was going on, but they looked the other way. When I had to try to turn in crimes committed by the deputies, it didn't go anywhere. When they wanted to pretend that I had done something wrong, after they'd been extremely harmful and negligent and allowed people to be harmful towards me, well, then they have their own court where one of the deputies who has harmed you gets to be the judge and jury and executioner, so to speak. Obviously, they don't actually execute you, but you don't have the right to an attorney, and they take away your rights to the attorney in many of these situations. Not that it matters. I didn't get an attorney who cared. They get paid the same whether they win or lose. They just pretend that they wasted more time than they actually wasted because they didn't actually spend any time working on your case. They spent just enough to say, hey, look, I did this. Did you really? Did you actually listen to me? One of the pieces of paper that I have here, fuck it, it's somewhere in this ginormous pile you guys have obviously seen. The last lawyer that I have, the very first thing at the very top says to ask me to tell my story from start to finish without interrupting. He wasn't going to do that. He'd rather just bill them and pretend that he did that. I had to try to turn in the abuse at the jail to my public pretenders who refused to do so despite the fact that they are mandatory reporters. One of them pretended that she wasn't a mandatory reporter. I got ran around in circles. They wanted the money. They didn't want to do the job. And the stuff that Melissa was saying, I got to hear the same thing. Oh, if I didn't see it, well, I've got video of it so I can show it to you. Okay? If that's the problem that you're having, I've said every single time I have video evidence. I have audio recordings. I have hospital paperwork. I've got psychological evaluations from multiple states. Oh, but they don't want to look at that. They want to ignore that because if they make a mistake, well, kind of like the situation with Mary Palominos bullying me for that was 9 months. When I had a mental breakdown over that, they didn't care. They locked me up for 23 hours a fucking day. They would intentionally create issues with the other inmates. And then they just held me long enough they could destroy the evidence. It's not like any of my attorneys care. I don't have a friend or family member who's going to help me to turn this in, which means it's not going to go anywhere, and they know it, which means they can commit felonies against their clients and get all of this money, like $22,000. That's a fucking shit ton of money for screwing over somebody in court, screwing over your client in court. Through all of this, they've pulled the mentally ill thing, mentally ill, to insinuate that I am schizophrenic and or delusional. And they intentionally tried to reword things to get others to infer that I was schizophrenic and or delusional. What do you guys call 911 for? Do you call 911 if somebody physically assaults you? Do you call 911 if people are threatening to kill you and your friends and family? Mary Palominos, that whole time, she was the one that they used to try to stage incidents and create incidents. I've got all sorts of records showing that I contacted the agencies that I needed to try to turn in the attorneys, to try to turn in the police officers and the sheriff's department deputies, but it didn't go anywhere. The deputies, knowing that I had to try to turn in their superiors, they went by their protocol, where their protocol is not the same as the mandatory reporter laws. The mandatory reporter laws state very specifically who they have to turn it into, and if their superior is one of the abusers, no, they shouldn't be turning it into their superiors. If Deputy Silvera is one of my predators and you know it, and you are aware of it, and you are aware that he is retaliating against me, no, you don't turn it in to Silvera. Deputy Moody claimed that he tried to turn in several of the situations of abuse that he had observed against me, and he also said the people that he tried to turn it into were fired. So there is that. Now, because Mary Palominos eventually became nice, does that make it okay that she did all of the things that she did before? No. Does it mean I'm willing to forgive her? Well, as long as she admits it in court. We've gotten plenty of admissions here that these people did wrong. Their own paperwork shows it. My own paperwork shows it. It's not that these things aren't happening. It's that I have to be afraid to turn them in because I'm a homeless man. And because of slander in the past being used to say, oh, well, you know, he's just that kind of a guy. How many of these people who knew me before all of this shit with Natalie and all this shit when I hurt my back, I was a much different person. But when you are physically injured, that will make you a target. If you're stuck out on the streets and you've got an income because you're disabled, that will make you a target. Having to try to find a safe place and jump through a bunch of government hoops and go to court because the officers that you tried to turn in lied. Over 30 times they've had to drop charges. That the charges were only there because I was trying to turn in officers. The officers I was trying to turn in lied to mental health workers and told them that I was schizophrenic and delusional. Imagine if your 9-year-old daughter tried to turn in a rape and the person who had raped her was a deputy and arrested her for, well, literally anything he wants to make up, and then says, oh, well, she's trying to harm herself. No, 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 no. She is afraid because she had to turn in her predator to himself. This is not okay, and this is what I'm repeatedly forced to do. That situation this morning with Melissa should not have happened. Just like all of those situations in the jail where I had to turn the deputies into themselves should not have happened. Why did these situations happen? Because I tried to turn them in. I had to turn them into themselves, and they got to see that. There was no way around it. That's one of the situations with them pulling the mentally ill thing. They can treat you however the hell they want. A lot of the laws that you guys keep on telling me, oh, well, this law and that law and so on and so forth, they can't do this. They can't hold you longer than 14 days without allowing you to have an attorney. Well, they can. They just call you mentally ill. They try to insinuate that you're schizophrenic and delusional, and then you get another evaluation. The next evaluator says that you're not schizophrenic or delusional, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. I got a bunch of stuff here that says it's not delusional. Not only does it say that I'm not delusional, these doctors looked up Natalie Bollinger and stated in all of their psychological evaluations that the Natalie Bollinger situation was true and that there is evidence that I am being abused over it. This is ongoing abuse. Since I got out of jail, even with all of the crimes committed by CARE and TFCC, I was still told to go to CARE and TFCC. TFCC knows that I tried to turn them in. They did not follow even their own rules or protocols. None of these places follow their rules or protocols when a victim tries to turn it in. Instead, they follow the backwoods bullshit. Just string them along. Just string them along. Change the subject. Interrupt them repeatedly. Tell them it's someone else's job. Tell them that you believe them and refuse to look at evidence, and then write down that they're delusional and believe that this stuff is happening. When you say believe instead of know, what you're insinuating is that the person is making it up or that you aren't for sure. So when you see a video of somebody punching me in the head and you say you believe it was an assault, well, you saw it. Even if you only saw it on video, you saw it. And if you're a mandatory reporter, regardless of where you are or what state, any mandatory reporter who saw those assaults on their YouTube channels also committed a crime. But you see that I have to spend a lot of time trying to turn in mandatory reporters who wanted to assume. And that's why you take a friend or family member in there with you who's seen that you're telling the truth. I don't have that. There's a feller who's helped me out a lot in town, and people keep saying, well, why don't you ask him? Why don't you ask him? Why don't you ask him? I have. And he always gives me a non-committal answer, and he has a very depressed sounding tone when he says it. So that should be my clue or inclination towards, sorry, not inclination, that's the wrong word. That should be my clue that he really doesn't want to, right? I don't get social cues. No, I do understand social cues. The stuff I don't understand, like, for example, the dating thing. I've never had a girlfriend. But also, much of what I noticed from the women that I knew in my life, especially the ones who are attracted to a guy, is that, all right, you have to believe their words. That's what the courts are going to go on, is her words. So if she tells you no, that's what you need to go by, because she might actually mean no. And if she means no, you're in trouble. And I know so many women who have complained to me that they have just been playing hard to get. Well, first of all, I don't care. Second of all, you know, a lot of these people that knew me before Natalie were aware that I was not interested in sex. I wanted a companion. And I'm not talking about a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I'm talking about a dog. But it's unsafe to have a dog because when you go to jail, they go to jail. If you're arrested as a homeless person on some BS charges, your dog might get put down. Your dog will go to the pound. It might be adopted out. And it takes money you don't have to get them out. So there's all this evidence that shows they knew Natalie Bollinger was not a delusion, that it was the truth. The people were harming me and were assaulting me. Russell verified this morning that he'd seen those videos, and I was pulling them up to play them again. When it comes to autism, instead of people going, oh, he's autistic, and then brush it off, why don't you get to know what that actually means for me? Also, PTSD, like what Leslie Carter wrote down, that was my more significant diagnosis. The PTSD is the thing that is more pertinent to my case. Why is that? Because the reactions I am having are reactions to abuse and trauma and neglect. It's not that I'm not going to any of these people to try to get the help that I need. It's that they're running me in circles. I don't have anybody to advocate for me. I don't have anybody looking at this evidence. When I finally get them to do something months later, finally, or years later, it's so half-assed. Like, I might as well just put a friggin' lead pill through my head. We'll make the ultimatum that you get 45 minutes of our time, and we're not even going to allow you time with a mandatory reporter. Well, that does not sound okay. At least Russell has seen some of the evidence. The most important stuff that I have, because I don't have access to those body cameras. I don't have access to any of that. I was prevented from access to that because nobody took the abuse seriously. But I do have access to a lot of evidence that shows that the people that they had come in there and repeatedly try to rubber stamp me as delusional knew that I was not from the start. They were already well aware, their coworkers were already well aware, and that was already in my file. But when you try to turn them in, what's to stop them from going into the file that they made about you and changing things to whatever they want, throw away what they want, or like Miss Shelley did, shred whatever they want? Now, I've documented all of the very specific games that were played by these people. I've got stacks and stacks of paper where I wrote it down. I've also got the reactions that I got from the services I was told were supposed to help me, the services that I was told to turn it into. I didn't have access to any of the evidence, and also there's a lot of the stuff that they did not give back. Like, there's a lot of evidence they didn't give back. They didn't give back my audio recording device. They also didn't give me back a whole bunch of little micro SD cards that go into the phones that have a bunch of evidence of a lot of assaults, a lot of threats, a lot of intimidation. And through all this situation, Mary Palominos, because she got into trouble for witnessing the situation where one of the deputies, what was his name? It was a very strange name. That's why I'm having problems with it. She was a witness to him chucking a spork at me, hitting me in the chest with it. I was on the floor sitting on my butt, so it's not like I was going to charge him or anything, or run after him or assault him or threaten him or anything like that. But they also know that all they have to do is make a false accusation. All they have to do is turn off their body cameras for a little bit of time. And that's exactly what they did. Mary Palominos, being a witness to that situation after having looked it up on their cameras and seeing it with her own two eyes, she got into trouble for that. And then every time that I talked to her after that for 9 months, she was incredibly cruel. Helped to try to coordinate situations where I could be bullied again, where the deputies would have an excuse to come into my cell and assault me. Where they intentionally tried to bully me into self-harm in order to get heard. They would literally ignore me unless I hurt myself. Just like you guys. You don't care if other people hurt me. You will ignore it. And anytime that I do anything desperate to get heard, then you go, oh, look, he's unhinged. He's a horrible person. No, that is not the case. I'm having to turn this into people who are going out of their way to pretend these situations didn't exist and move on. So I got to try to go through the videos I've posted up already and try to listen through them hour by hour and write down exactly what time they said what and how inappropriate it was. That way it's easy to look up. I also got to try to get the full recordings with well, actually, this thing's now able to hold a full hour on it. So I should be able to put those recordings up in their entirety. We'll see what we can do today. I do have to go out and get something to eat and something to drink. I've been cooking my own stuff, but I got to have some meat, some protein. So, wish me luck. Let's hope I make it to the store and back without getting fucked with by anybody in the public or the police.